The saga of Pink Floyd is certainly one worth telling. Consider the facts. Pink Floyd is one of rock's most celebrated bands, yet its members are among rock's most reluctant celebrities. From their earliest days with Syd Barrett right to the present day, Pink Floyd has defined state-of-the-art recording and captivating concert production. Their album, Dark Side of the Moon, is the most consistent-selling record in the history of the record business. Yet, how many of us could name each member? Well, you'll get to know Pink Floyd a lot better, because Roger Waters, David Gilmour, Richard Wright, and Nick Mason are going to cover Pink Floyd from beginning to present as The Source presents Shades of Pink, the definitive Pink Floyd profile. Our profile of Pink Floyd is just getting started. When we come back, we'll examine their career from the very beginning. In 1965, Roger Waters, Richard Wright, and Nick Mason were architecture students at the Regent Street Polytechnic School in London. According to drummer Nick Mason, the idea to put a band together came quite by accident.
We were all students together in the first year, and there was a guy in the year who was writing songs, and he wanted to play the songs to a publisher. So he asked various people if they'd play with instruments and if they might be prepared to put the band together to play his songs. So Rick and Roger and myself all admitted that we did play instruments in some sort of fashion. And so we sort of put a band together. And I remember we played the songs for the publisher, who said the songs were quite good, but forget the band. I think if we'd listened to anyone who had any taste at the time, would have all folded up right then and there. But fortunately, we were so egocentric and just carried on.
Originally calling themselves Sigma 6, the T-Set, the Megadeth, and the Abdabs, Waters, Wright, and Mason eventually recruited guitarists Bob Close and Syd Barrett. Waters and Barrett were old friends from high school in Cambridge.
While we were at the Poly, we had various people in and out of the band, and in particular a very good guitar player called Bob Close, who was really a far better musician than any of the rest of us. But I think he had some exam problems and really felt that he had to apply himself to work, whereas the rest of us were not that conscientious. And so he was sort of out of the band, and we were looking for another guitar player, and we knew that Syd was coming up to London from Cambridge. And so he was just co-opted into the whole thing.
This is the beginning of what Syd Barrett called the Pink Floyd sound, and it is Barrett who's the acknowledged founder of Pink Floyd. In February 1966, Pink Floyd was booked to play at the weekly Sunday afternoon show called the Spontaneous Underground at London's Marquee Club. Here and later at the UFO Club, the Floyd built a loyal following and became more or less the official band of London's growing underground scene.
I think we started to develop a cult following because everyone was talking about the psychedelic revolution and light and sound and all the rest of it. People were looking to try and guess, as they always are, what was going to happen next in music. And this suddenly looked like this was what was going to happen next. We were incredibly awful. We were a dreadful band and must have sounded frightful, but we were so different and so odd that I think, odd for those days. Of course now people can look at it and laugh. You look at the early photographs and we just look like a sort of elderly version of the Monkees or something.
Mm-hmm.
But it's sort of, at the time, that was what was happening, and no one really understood it, but they all thought they ought to try and get in on it. So the record deal was, in fact, a really rather good one, considering we had no track record whatsoever and couldn't play the instruments. I think Syd was a major talent as a songwriter, and maybe could have been as a musician. He did stop. He's not done anything for the last 10 years. And consequently, people who don't perhaps entirely achieve all their potential become even more legendary.
See Emily Play and Ardell Lane, two Syd Barrett compositions that were Pink Floyd's first chart successes in 1967. Even then, the essence of Pink Floyd couldn't be captured on record. Their early concerts featured a choreographed light show and quadraphonic sound system. Following the release of their debut album, The Piper at the Gates of Dawn, Syd Barrett's behavior grew more and more erratic. Barrett, the band's leader, the one who'd brought Pink Floyd to prominence, was now in over his head. Keyboardist Richard Wright.
Sadly, Syd was a casualty of the so-called psychedelic period that we were meant to represent. Because everybody believed we were taking acid before we went on stage and all this stuff. Unfortunately, one of us was, and that was Syd. And it's a simple matter, really. Syd just had a big overdose of acid, and that was it. it was very frightening because and I couldn't believe what had happened. It was, I remember we had to do a radio show and we were waiting for him and he didn't turn up. And then he came the next day and he was a different person.
In February 1968, Roger Waters asked an old friend of his from Cambridge to join the band. Said Syd Barrett's status was up in the air. 7 weeks later, Syd was phased out completely, and David Gilmour became Pink Floyd's guitarist.
The first plan was that I would join and make it a 5-piece, so it would make it easier, so that Syd could still be strange, but the band would still function. And then the next idea was that Syd would stay home and do writing and be the glamorous and elusive character that didn't actually perform with us. And the third plan was that he wouldn't do anything at all. And it quickly changed around. It was obviously impossible to carry on working that way, so we basically ditched Syd and stopped going to pick him up for gigs.
With Syd out of the band completely, in order for Pink Floyd to continue, someone else would have to write the material. Roger Waters took the controls with some apprehension.
I had no idea that I would ever write anything. When I bought my first guitar aged 15 and decided I was going to be a rock star along with umpteen million other kids, I had no idea really that I would ever write songs. And in the early years I didn't have to because Syd was writing all the material. And it was only after he stopped writing that the rest of us had to start trying to do it. And I'd always been told at school anyway that I was absolutely bloody hopeless at everything, so I had no real confidence about any of it.
Set the controls for The Heart of the Sun from Pink Floyd's second album, A Saucer Full of Secrets, released in June 1968. That same month, the Floyd became the first rock band to play a free concert in London's Hyde Park. I'm Charlie Kendall. Our profile of Pink Floyd will continue with Roger Waters, David Gilmour, Richard Wright, and Nick Mason. Over the years, Pink Floyd has written music for several movie soundtracks. Their film score debut was in 1969, when they wrote and performed the music for a Barbet Schroeder film called More. Richard Wright.
His feeling about music for a movie was, in those days, that he didn't want a soundtrack to go behind the movie. All he wanted was literally, if the radio switched on in the car, for example, he wanted something to come out of the car.
Daily, 10 to 5 on
Or someone goes and switches the TV on, or whatever it is. So he wanted soundtrack to relate exactly to what was happening in the movie, rather than a film score backing the visuals.
When Pink Floyd signed to EMI Records in 1967, they were assigned staff producer Norman Hurricane Smith to work with them in the studio. 4 albums later, the members of Pink Floyd felt stifled by Smith, and beginning with the live side of Uma Guma, started producing the albums themselves. David Gilmour.
We were phasing Norman out around, through that period of time. He was doing, at the beginning, he was very good, he taught us a lot of things. He certainly taught me a lot of things. But he was also quite frustrating at times, because he would always want to even things out, make them more homogeneous. And I can remember just little episodes of things that I wanted to try something, and he would be in our way, or in my way, when he was trying to do things. And a certain point came when we felt we had got all we could get from him, and he was only hindering in certain places.
Uma Guma, Pink Floyd's 4th album, was released in late 1969 and featured 2 discs, one live, one studio. On the studio album, each member indulged himself with his own extended composition. Nick Mason, for one, enjoyed the experiment, but admits that the parts weren't as strong as the whole.
I thought that was a very good and interesting little exercise, the whole business of undoing a bit. But I still feel really that that's quite a good example of the sum being greater than the parts, that it's an interesting album and all sorts of ideas are contained in it, but it actually is still more satisfactory when we work as a band.
Following the release of Uma Guma, Pink Floyd went to Rome to write and record 4 songs for the film Zabriskie Point. Then David Gilmour and Roger Waters returned to London to co-produce Syd Barrett's first solo album, The Madcap Laughs. Finally, in late 1970, Pink Floyd's 5th album was released, Atom Heart Mother. You may have wondered where the title came from.
The day we were trying to think of it, we had a newspaper. We were sitting outside a pub in London in our break in recording. 7 o'clock one sunny evening in London, and there was a woman who had had heart surgery, and she'd had an atomic heart pacemaker fitted on her heart And she was a mother. And it said, atom heart mother, blah, 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 you know. We thought, atom heart mother. Tight. Simple as that.
David Gilmour and Richard Wright co-produced the second Syd Barrett album in late 1970. For most of the following year, the Floyd toured the world, stopping occasionally to record tracks for their next album, Metal. Pink Floyd's sixth album, Metal, marked the vocal debut of drummer Nick Mason.
Possibly the most interesting thing about One of These Days is that it actually stars myself as a vocalist for the first time on any of our records that actually got to the public. And it's a rather startling performance involving the use of a high voice and slowed down tape.
In concert, Pink Floyd strives to equal or surpass the production elements on their records.
Yes, we did all sorts of strange things. You know, for live concerts as well, we used to make up tapes for the for the audience to come in by. And we had one half-hour-long tape which would play for the half an hour while the audience were coming in before we started our show and things like that, you know. So just tapes of bird noises in quadraphonic sound, you know, with birds singing and sort of pheasants taking off in the distance and swans taking off from water and a tractor driving down one side of the room and an aeroplane going over the top. And all these things just carrying on, all from just different sound effects records, you know. And you just stick them in and you create a type of mood.
The Pink Floyd's next album was their second movie soundtrack for filmmaker Barbet Schroeder. Recorded in France, Obscured by Clouds is one of David Gilmour's favorite Floyd albums.
I love that album. Yes, it's really fast, rapid stuff without any great need to make a concept out of it. Yes, I mean, that was actually when we just got the very first synthesizer ever invented, and we were playing with it, the EMS Synthi, and all you could do was tune it up to play a note, and then press it for it to play the note. Like, you couldn't play notes with a keyboard on it at that juncture, or if you could, we didn't know how to. That was the first time we ever used any form of a synthesizer. It was on Obscured by Clouds album.
If the Beatles' Sgt. Pepper revolutionized the concept of rock albums in 1967, then Pink Floyd's The Dark Side of the Moon fine-tuned that concept into genuine audio art 6 years later. Recorded at EMI's fabled Abbey Road Studios, where the Beatles recorded all of their albums, Pink Floyd produced The Dark Side of the Moon by themselves over a period of 9 months. When it was released in March 1973, Dark Side represented a culmination of the band's studio experiments and Roger Waters' insights that had only been brushed upon in their earlier recordings. The fact that Dark Side of the Moon was Pink Floyd's first album to reach #1 in America is easily eclipsed by the fact that today the album is still on Billboard's top album charts. It is one of the most consistent selling albums in pop music history, over 530 consecutive weeks. With the help of David Gilmour, Nick Mason, and Richard Wright, here's side 1 of Pink Floyd's The Dark Side of the Moon.
We had originally gotten on the run a different thing, which is on a live one. If you've heard one of those bootlegs, you might have heard a different version of it on The Dark Side of the Moon. We had a sort of guitar passage, but it wasn't very good. And we just got this new synthesizer, a briefcase model EMS one, and in the lid there was a little sequencer thing. And I was playing with the sequencer device attachment and came up with this sound, which is the basic sound of it. And Roger sort of heard it and came over and started playing with it too. And then he actually put in the notes that we made the little, it was his sequence, whatever it was. He made that little sequence up, but I got the actual original sound, and I actually was the one doing the controlling on the take that we used. So, and then we chucked all sorts of things over the top of it afterwards. He had just recently, before we did that album, gone out with a whole set of equipment and had recorded all these clocks in a clock shop. And we were doing the song Time, and he said, listen, I just did all these things, I did all these clocks. And so we wheeled out his tape and listened to it. He said, great, stick it on. And that actually is Alan Parsons' idea.
The drums used on the Time track are rototoms. I think we did some experiments with some other drums called boobams, which are very small tuned drums. But the rototoms actually gave the best to find.
White Gig in the Sky. It was just me playing in the studio, playing some chords, and probably Dave or Roger saying, that sounds nice. Maybe we could use that for this part of the album. And then me going away and trying to develop it. So then I wrote the music for that, and then it was the middle bit with Claire Torrey singing, the fantastic voice. We wanted something for that bit, and she came in and sang on it.
We had people come in the studio and sit down, and we'd made lots of pieces of paper, lots of cards up with a question on. And then we set them up with a microphone and everything, and had the tape recorder running, and they had to sit there, and they had to answer the questions. That's how we got all the voices and all the little lines that you hear on Dark Side of the Moon all over the place. That's how we got them. We just said, what do you think of the Dark Side of the Moon? And that's how we got the answer by the Irish doorman at Abbey Road, Jerry. He said, there's no dark side of the moon, really, it's all dark.
I never kind of sit down and try and think of ideas. Ideas arrive, and I go, that's not a bad idea, and I may make a note of it somewhere, and then I'll come back to it later, and then maybe it will develop, and I'll sit down at the piano one day and work out some chords or a melody that comes together with a bit of an idea. But all that happens without me trying at all. I don't have to try. The difficult bit then is developing those short ideas into full-length things. That's where the craft comes in, and the graft. Is then that does take a long time. Well, it can do. Sometimes absolutely the hardest things are, you've written 2 verses and a bridge to a song, and you've got to write a last verse. And sometimes to write that last verse can become an absolute nightmare.
The Dark Side of the Moon, still on the charts for over 10 years. Scenes of the band in the studio recording that album can be seen in the 1972 film Pink Floyd Live at Pompeii. We've still got a long way to go, so stay with us. Next up, Wish You Were Here. In 1975, Pink Floyd signed with Columbia Records in America and released Wish You Were Here, expanding on the 3 themes explored on Dark Side of the Moon: loneliness, alienation, and madness. Wish You Were Here was inspired by a simple guitar figure David Gilmour came up with.
The whole thing started out of that first guitar thing, ding, 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 ding. And I was just in the studio rehearsal room we were doing one day, and I was just playing with the guitar, and those notes started coming out, just a little motif on the guitar. When I played it a few times, and I put some DDO and some other effects on it, started playing again, and it sort of pinged out, it sounded nice. And I was thinking, that's really great, and Roger really got off on it. He did, he got exactly the same from it as I was getting from it. And I don't know quite how it happened, but those sort of things happen once in a while. And that was like the start point that gave us the start for making the whole record.
Probably the most legendary Pink Floyd story occurred during the Wish You Were Here sessions. The album was unofficially dedicated to Syd Barrett, and the song Shine On You Crazy Diamond was written about him.
Roger was there, and he was sitting at the desk, and I came in and I saw this guy sitting behind. Huge, bald, fat guy. And I thought, he looks a bit strange. Anyway, so I sat down with Roger at the desk, and we worked for 10 minutes, and this guy kept on getting up and brushing his teeth and then doing really weird things, but keeping quiet. And I said to Roger, who is he? And Roger said, I don't know. And I said, well, I assumed he was a friend of yours. And he said, no, I don't know who he is. Anyway, it took me a long time, and then suddenly I realized it was Syd after maybe 45 minutes. And he came in as we were doing the vocals for Shine On You Crazy Diamond, which was basically about Syd. And he just, for some incredible reason, he picked the very day that was doing a song which was about him. And we hadn't seen him, I don't think, for 2 years before. And that's what's so incredibly weird about this guy. And a bit disturbing as well. I mean, particularly when you see a guy that you couldn't recognize him. Then for him to pick the very day we want to start putting vocals on, which is a song about him, and very strange.
We started doing outdoor gigs, so we had to have a roof. So I said, what would be good? Why don't we build an enormous pyramid, and we could fill it with helium, and at the end of the show, we could let it go. And this was 60 foot. The base of this thing was 60 feet. There was a lot of trouble getting that past the rest of the lads. Nicky was always a great ally. Nick Mason was always a great ally in all these things. He liked the idea of it. And finally we did it, and it was unbelievable. Three Rivers Stadium in Pittsburgh, and suddenly this thing went whoosh. It was on a cable, so that we could try and get it back again. Then it turned upside down, and the balloon that was inside it shot off into outer space, and the rest of it fell to earth in the crowd and was ripped into a million pieces, and they all took a bit home.
It's quite easy to make an audio illusion, to create one, like the one of the door opening and people being behind that door. It was a very easy thing to do. You just have a sound of this thing, the buzzing of the door opening. All you got to get is some sort of humming noise, and then you just fade up a fader with talking and laughing and clinking of glasses and everything. It sounds just like the doors opening, and you could suddenly start hearing all these people at the other side of it. And those things are very, very simple audio illusions that you can create.
And everyone never understood, really, or couldn't believe the way we reacted to the business side of it. For example, refusing to do interviews, or being told, well, if you do an extra week in America, you're going to earn this amount of money, and that's when we say no, we don't want to do it, and things like that. We always went in a way against the accepted business way of doing things, right from the beginning in some ways. When we started playing the music we were doing, everyone in the business just said they couldn't understand it or believe it, and never believed it would be successful.
By the way, Have a Cigar features English street singer Roy Harper on vocals. Stay tuned. Animals is next. Following the success of Wish You Were Here, Pink Floyd released Animals in early 1977. David and Nick give insight to some of the effects used in recording the song Sheep.
Roger was singing the note, and he sort of dragged the note out long, and it just suddenly struck me that we could crossfade it with a synthesizer note, and as his note comes down, you just bring up the synthesizer one, and you crossfade them together, then turn the vibrato up on the synthesizer, and just to make a strange effect, and it worked.
I think most of the effects are backward echo, so the drums are put on normally, and then the tape reversed and echo put on, so that you, as I say, you get that slight, instead of a decay with something going, that's reversed, so you get the thing building up to the actual sound, so it goes shh.
Just as Pink Floyd are masters of the audio illusion, Hypnosis, the people who create their album work, are equally skilled at creating the optical illusion.
The pig that you see up there is not there in that actual picture. They got this fantastic shot of Battersea Power Station, but we didn't have the pig up there. And we put the pig up there, and we shot the pig up there. And we took the pig out of one picture of Battersea Power Station and put it onto another picture. So it is right because it is in that position and the lighting is right on it and everything. So removing it from one picture and putting it onto another was okay. But to try and fake it really would not have been okay.
For keyboardist Richard Wright, Animals was the beginning of the end of his tenure with the band, as more and more, Roger Waters had become Floyd's dominant member.
Animals was, in a way, the beginning of the departure for me from the Floyd, because Animals was Roger's concept, if you like. And I didn't actually write anything on Animals. So I was just, like Nick, playing the music.
3 years and several tours passed before the fans would have a new album. In 1980, Pink Floyd released The Wall, an ambitious two-record set that included the band's first #1 single in America, Another Brick in the Wall, Part 2. Roger Waters' view of the world had grown progressively bleak, and even David Gilmour found Roger's demo for The Wall a little too depressing.
He gave us all a cassette of the whole thing, and I couldn't listen to it. It was too depressing and too boring in lots of places. But I liked the basic idea. We eventually agreed to do it, but we had to chuck out a lot of stuff, rewrite a lot of things, and put a lot of new bits in, put a lot of old bits out. And when we actually were making it, and Roger was under pressure, and we had said that wasn't good enough, Roger actually wrote some of the best ones after that point, when we were actually doing it, when he was under pressure and being pushed to do things, he did some of the best things, I think.
Throughout Pink Floyd's nearly 20-year career, they've maintained an against-the-grain approach that has satisfied them artistically and financially.
When you start coming up with ideas for doing things like this, of course, the immediate reaction always is, it's going to cut into the profit margins, I don't know if we want to do, and there have been some ludicrous things that I've done in the past that the Floyd did in the past, it was a real battle to get them done, because they were going to slice $150,000 off the bottom line. Your writing, I believe, comes out largely from a personality that develops when you're a child, and that however successful you may become, you don't change inside. You may become crushed by the weight of your success, and that weight may prevent you from expressing the feelings that you will always have inside. I don't think the way that a person feels ever really changes through their life. Do you?
As you know, when the Floyd took the Wall on the road, their American tour played only 2 cities, New York and Los Angeles. The elaborate show featured the construction and demolition of a wall 31 feet high and 160 feet long. Nick Mason.
The problem really with the show is that it wasn't a touring show, so it had to be set up and left and then taken down again. There were a lot of light operators and stage operators and wall builders because of the amount of stuff that went up, went down, floated across, did this, did that. There were a lot of operators rather than just people putting stuff out. And, of course, we had lots of semis, I believe you call them, because of the special lighting pods that we use, which each one needs a trailer unit to hold it. And the special stage, because of the way the stage was actually used as a sort of structural bracing piece for the building of the wall.
For David Gilmour, one of the highlights of that tour was performing the guitar solo of Comfortably Numb.
It's a fantastic moment, I can tell you, to be standing up on there. And when Roger's just finished singing his thing, and I'm standing there waiting, and I'm in pitch darkness and no one knows I'm there yet, and Roger's down and he finishes his line and I start mine, and the big back spots and everything go on, and the audience, they're all looking straight ahead and down, and suddenly there's all this light up there and they all sort of, their heads all lift up, and there's this thing up there and the sound's coming out and everything, and every night there's this great from about 15,000 people, and that's quite something, I can tell you.
Following the release of The Wall, a feature-length movie of the album appeared, starring Bob Geldof of the Boomtown Rats as the central character Pink. Of course, Pink Floyd's music is featured throughout, including When the Tigers Broke Free, a song that wasn't included on the album. The Wall would become Richard Wright's final cut with the band. He announced his resignation after the Wall tour. The Final Cut is the most current Pink Floyd album, and according to Nick Mason, was meant to be a sequel to The Wall.
It was an aftermath to The Wall. At one time, it was actually The Final Cut was the title, meaning that it was the final cut of The Wall. It was going to contain a lot of old Wall material that hadn't made it onto the album, or that was a sort of finale to The Wall. So the two albums are actually rather interconnected.
All the members of Pink Floyd have recorded solo albums. Founding father Syd Barrett recorded 2 albums in 1970 and left another unfinished and unreleased in 1974. Guitarist David Gilmour reunited with his high school band Jokers Wild for his solo debut in 1978. The lineup was Gilmour on guitar and vocals, backed by Rick Wills of Foreigner on bass and Willie Wilson on drums. Gilmour's guitar style is one of rock's most identifiable. You may have wondered how he started and how he approaches the instrument.
It's very hard to tell what made me first decide to play the guitar. Rock Around the Clock by Paul Haley came out when I was 10, and that probably had something to do with it. But I was a big fan of all that stuff. I was also a fan of Lead Belly and other guitar-y type things from when I was about 10 onwards. And I didn't actually pick one up till I was about 14 or 15. I've never had fast fingers. They're really pretty slow compared to most, and the coordination between left and right hand and stuff is not great. And if I start trying to do too fast, then the right hand gets out of sync with the left hand. So I have to rely on other things, and I rely on effects, fuzz boxes, DDLs, anything that I can lay my hands on. And then I just try and make nice sort of melodies with it. I try to make it sing, I try to imagine that the guitar's kind of singing. Right?
Earlier this year, David released his second solo album, About Face.
Doing this album, I wanted to make a really good record. I didn't want to do it very, very quickly. I wanted to get the best musicians in the world that I could get hold of to play with me. So this time I thought, well, I'll just make a little list of all my favourite musicians, best drummer, best bass player, best keyboard player, and work through the list and see who I can get. And Jeff Porcaro was top of my drummers list, and Pino Palladino was top of my bass players list, and Ian Cooley, or the Rev as he's known, he actually came and did the bulk of the Hammond and piano playing, and he was terrific. Steve Winwood was top of my keyboard playing list, but he couldn't do most of the album, but I got him to do a bit.
Following its release, David assembled a touring band and successfully toured Europe and America this past spring and early summer. Keyboardist Richard Wright's solo album, Wet Dream, more or less coincided with the release of David Gilmour's first album. And now that he's officially out of Pink Floyd, he's formed a new band called Z.
So I've been working with Dave Harris, he was in the band called Fashion, and we just released a record in the UK, an album, under the name Z. That's the last 9 months. What's it like? We'll have to hear it. We plan, hopefully, to start writing the next album, and then, on the strength of having material from the first album and the second album, we would go on the road. But it's very tentative at the moment. There is no definite plans.
Nick Mason's lone solo album was called Fictitious Sports, and aside from producing records, his real passion is motor racing and collecting vintage race cars.
I'm meant to be involved in making a film really about my motor racing, but the idea with that is possibly that we'd do a section, part of the film would be some modern racing, and I might work with someone else and do some music for that.
Following on the heels of David Gilmour's recent album, Roger Waters released his first solo effort, The Pros and Cons of Hitchhiking.
Well, the idea for the album came concurrently with the idea for the wall, the bones of the idea. I wrote both pieces at roughly the same time. And in fact, I made demo tapes of them both, and in fact presented both demo tapes to the rest of the Floyd. And said, look, I'm going to do one of these as a solo project, and we'll do one as a band album. And you can choose. So this was the one that was left over. I mean, it's developed an awful lot since then.
I don't know what I shall do in the future, but there's no way I can stop working. If I stop working for a bit, I find myself drifting into the room with the piano, sitting down, starting to tinker, thinking, well, what if I shall go to my grave with, well, I wonder if, and from those I wonder if something happens.
Pink Floyd's mark on live and recorded music is indelible. If the hallmark of a great band is to have a signature sound, then certainly Pink Floyd meets the qualifications, because no band sounds like Pink Floyd. They're an original, a classic, and are legendary.